Ambassador Valith stood in the center of the Hall of Species and tried not to let her nervousness show. Her crystalline body caught the light from 1,000 floating lanterns, casting small rainbows across the polished floor. This was her first day as a junior diplomat for the Sindari Collective, and everything felt overwhelming. The Hall of Species was the heart of galactic politics. Representatives from hundreds of worlds walked through its massive corridors. Valith saw beings made of living metal, creatures that floated on clouds of gas, and organisms so strange she could not even guess how they breathed. All of them had come to Nixora, primed to maintain peace among the stars. Her mentor, a senior diplomat named Thros, guided her through the orientation with patient words. He showed her the communication arrays, the treaty archives, and the meditation chambers where difficult negotiations took place. But Valith found herself drawn to something else entirely. In the center of the main chamber hung a massive holographic map of the galaxy. Billions of stars glowed softly in the darkness, each one tagged with information about the species that lived there. Valith had studied this map for years during her training. She knew the location of every major power, every trade route, every contested border, but she had never noticed the small red marker before. It pulsed slowly in a distant arm of the galaxy. A single star system, unremarkable in every way, surrounded by a warning field that made it glow like fresh blood. Sol system. Restricted. Do not engage. Valith moved closer to examine it. The marker contained no additional information. No population data. No trade agreements. No diplomatic notes. Just those 4 words burning in the darkness like a threat. She turned to Thros. What is this system? Why is it marked this way? Her mentor's expression changed. The warmth left his eyes, replaced by something cold and careful. That is not something you need to concern yourself with, young one, but I have never seen a marker like this before. What species lives there? Are they dangerous? Thros was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. The species is called humanity. They live on a planet called Earth, and yes, they are dangerous. More dangerous than you can possibly imagine. Valith waited for him to explain, but he simply walked away. She was left standing alone before the map, staring at that pulsing red light. Over the following weeks, Valith tried to learn more about the Sol system. She searched the public archives and found nothing. She asked her fellow junior diplomats and received only confused looks. She even attempted to access the restricted historical files, but her clearance level was far too low. The mystery consumed her thoughts. She began watching the other diplomats more carefully, searching for any sign that they knew something about Earth. What she discovered made her confusion grow even deeper. The Kreth Dominion had a permanent delegation on Nixera Prime. They were a warrior species, tall and powerful, with thick scales and eyes like burning coals. The Kreth had conquered 47 worlds through military force. They respected nothing except strength, and they feared nothing at all. Or so Valith had always believed. One evening, she observed a Kreth war commander walking through the docking bay. He moved with the confidence of a predator, his ceremonial armor gleaming with medals from a dozen campaigns. Other species stepped aside to let him pass. Even the station's security officers avoided his gaze. Then a human cargo ship drifted past the viewing window. The change in the Kreth commander was immediate and shocking. His confident stride faltered. His scaled hand moved to the weapon at his side, not in aggression, but in something that looked almost like fear. He watched the small human vessel until it disappeared from view, and only then did he continue on his way. Valith had seen Kreth warriors face death without flinching. She had watched recordings of them laughing in the middle of battle. They were genetically engineered to feel no fear, and yet this commander had been afraid of an unarmed cargo ship. She knew then that she had to find the truth. Valith spent months building relationships with senior diplomats. She performed every task with perfect dedication. She volunteered for difficult assignments and never complained. Slowly, she earned their trust. Finally, she approached the oldest member of the Galactic Council. Counselor Dravos had lived for over 1,000 years. He had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. His ancient body was supported by mechanical systems, but his mind remained sharp as a blade. Counselor Valeth said, bowing deeply, "I wish to understand something. I have asked many people, and none will give me an answer. I ask you now, with great respect, to tell me what happened with Earth." Dravos was silent for so long that Valeth wondered if he had heard her. His mechanical eyes, focused on some distant point, seeing memories that stretched back centuries. "You are young," he said at last. "You were not alive when the Kreth were at the height of their power. You do not remember the fear that gripped the galaxy when their fleets moved from system to system, taking whatever they wished. I have studied the history, Counselor. It's history written by survivors." Dravos made a sound that might have been a laugh. 200 years ago, the Kreth believed they were invincible. They'd never been defeated in open warfare. They decided to expand their territory into a new region of the galaxy. A region that contained a single inhabited world. Earth. Yes, Earth. The old counselor turned his mechanical eyes toward her. The Kreth sent 3,000 warships to conquer a species that had never traveled beyond its own moon. They expected the campaign to last 3 days. What happened? Dravos was quiet again. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Valeth's crystal body vibrate with unease. "Some lessons cost too much to learn twice, young ambassador. The Kreth learned what happens when you threaten humanity. The galaxy learned to never make the same mistake." It began to move away, his mechanical body clicking in worry. "If you truly wish to understand, there is a sealed testimony in the archives, the account of Admiral Vorath Kren, the only Kreth commander who survived the Earth campaign. I will grant you access to this file. Read it carefully, and then perhaps you will understand why that red marker exists." Valeth rushed to the archives that very night. Her hands trembled as she accessed the sealed file. The testimony was hundreds of pages long, filled with military reports, sensor data, the personal account of an admiral who had entered Earth's system as a conqueror and left as a broken survivor. She began to read, and by the time she finished, she understood why the entire galaxy feared a single blue planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star. Admiral Vorath Kren stood on the command bridge of his flagship and watched the blue planet grow larger on the viewing screen. After 300 years of military service, he had led the conquest of 12 worlds. He had crushed rebellions, destroyed enemy fleets, and brought entire civilizations to their knees. Victory was not just expected, it was guaranteed. The Kreth Dominion had spent decades studying this primitive species called humanity. Their scouts had observed Earth from the darkness between stars, collecting data on human technology, military strength, and social structures. The reports were almost amusing. Humans still fought each other with chemical explosives and primitive projectile weapons. They had only recently discovered how to leave their own atmosphere. Their fastest ships crawled through space at speeds the Kreth considered embarrassingly slow. The classification was simple. Level 2, primitive. Species advanced enough to be useful as slaves, but far too weak to pose any real threat. Vorath had requested only 500 warships for the invasion. His superiors had insisted on 3,000, not because they were needed, but because the Dominion wanted to send a message to the rest of the galaxy. This was what happened to species who lived in territory the Kreth desired. The fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel just beyond the orbit of Earth's single moon. 3,000 warships arranged themselves in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready. It was the largest invasion force the Kreth had assembled. In 50 years, and Vorath felt a small amount of pride as he surveyed his command. This would be quick. This would be clean. And when it was over, he would add another medal to his collection and move on to the next conquest. His communications officer opened a channel to the planet below. The message was simple and direct, translated into every human language they had catalogued. Inhabitants of Earth, this is Admiral Vorath Kren of the Kreth Dominion. Your planet and all its resources now belong to the Dominion. You will surrender unconditionally within 1 standard hour. All military forces will stand down. All leaders will present themselves for processing. Resistance is not advised. Those who cooperate will be allowed to serve the Dominion. Those who resist will be destroyed. This is your only warning. Vorath leaned back in his command chair and waited. He had delivered this message many times before. The responses were always the same: panic, confusion, desperate attempts at negotiation. Sometimes there was brief resistance, quickly crushed, but in the end, they all surrendered. Every species in the galaxy eventually recognized the futility of fighting the Kreth. The response came in less than 10 minutes. A single transmission, audio only, from a location somewhere in the southern portion of the largest continent the voice belonged to. A human female. Her tone was calm and steady, without any trace of fear. Admiral Vorath Kren. This is General Catherine Eulerin of the United Earth Defense Council. I speak for all the nations of this world. We have received your demands and have considered them carefully. Vorath smiled. Here it comes, he thought. The negotiation. The pleading. The desperate attempt to save some small part of their civilization. We decline. The bridge fell silent. Vorath's smile faded. He waited for more, but the transmission had ended. That is all? He asked his communications officer. Yes, Admiral. The transmission has terminated. For a moment, Varatha did not know how to respond. In 3 centuries, no species had ever simply refused. They always tried to negotiate. They always asked for terms. They always showed some recognition of the hopelessness of their situation. This human had said 2 words and then stopped talking. Vorath felt a small flicker of annoyance. Perhaps they did not understand. Perhaps they believed this was some kind of bluff. He decided to educate them. Launch the advanced scouts, he ordered. 30 ships. Have them enter the atmosphere over major population centers. Low-altitude flight patterns. Let them see what they are dealing with. The order was carried out immediately. 30 small attack craft detached from the main fleet and began their descent toward Earth. They screamed through the upper atmosphere, leaving trails of fire in the sky. The plan was simple. Fly over human cities. Let the primitive creatures see Kreth technology with their own eyes. Fear would do the rest. Vorath watched the sensor display as the scouts descended. They passed through the cloud layer and dropped to attack altitude. The cities of Earth spread out below them, filled with millions of humans who were about to learn their place in the galaxy. Then every single scout disappeared from sensors. Vorath blinked. He checked the display again. Where 30 green lights had been, there was now nothing. No signals. No debris. No distress calls. The ships were simply gone. Sensor malfunction, he said. Run a diagnostic. His tactical officer worked frantically at his console. Sensors are functioning normally, Admiral. The scouts have been destroyed. All 30 ships. Time of destruction was simultaneous. Impossible. The humans did not have weapons capable of destroying Kreth scouts. Their missiles were too slow. Their targeting systems were too primitive. Even if they had somehow managed to hit 1 ship, they could not have destroyed all 30 at the exact same moment. Show me the final telemetry. The display flickered and showed the last images captured by the scout ships. Vorath saw human cities below, roads filled with vehicles, buildings reaching toward the sky. Then he saw something else. Bright lights rising from the ground, hundreds of them, thousands of them. Moving faster than any human weapon should have been able to move, the image cut to static. Vorath stared at the empty screen. A feeling he had not experienced in centuries began to creep into his chest. It was small and unfamiliar, but it was there, growing with each passing second. Doubt. Send another wave, he ordered, his voice harder now. 100 ships. Full defensive systems active. I want to know what happened to my scouts. The second wave launched. 100 attack craft, each one armed with enough firepower to level a city. They descended toward Earth in tight formation. Their shields at maximum power, they entered the atmosphere over the largest ocean. Vorath watched the sensor display. The ships dropped through the clouds. They approached the water, and then one by one, they vanished. Not destroyed in a flash of weapons fire, not struck by missiles or energy beams, they simply stopped transmitting, as if the planet itself had swallowed them whole. 100 ships, gone. The bridge was absolutely silent. Every officer stared at their console, afraid to speak, afraid to breathe. Something was very wrong, something that none of them had ever encountered before. Voreth slowly rose from his command chair. Through the viewing window, he could see the blue planet hanging in space. It looked so peaceful, so harmless. A world of water and clouds, home to a species that should have been nothing more than easy prey. For the first time in 300 years, Admiral Vorath Kren was uncertain, and somewhere on the surface below, General Catherine Eulerin was watching the sky, waiting for the next move. With a small smile on her face, Admiral Vorath refused to believe what his sensors were telling him. Equipment failed. Technology malfunctioned. These were simple explanations for simple problems. The alternative was unthinkable. He ordered a full tactical scan of the planet. Every ship in his fleet turned its sensors toward Earth, analyzing every square meter of the surface. What they found made the entire command bridge fall silent. The humans had no orbital defense platforms. They had no energy shields protecting their cities. They had no fleet of warships waiting in hidden bases. By every standard measure of galactic military power, they were completely unprotected. But they had something else. Something far more disturbing. The entire planet was covered in weapons. Not the primitive firearms the Kreth had expected. Hidden beneath the surface of every continent, buried in mountains and deserts and frozen wastelands, were missile silos. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. Each one containing weapons capable of reaching orbit. Each one aimed at the sky, waiting. Submarines moved through every ocean. Invisible to surface scans, armed with enough firepower to destroy small moons. Aircraft sat in underground bunkers, ready to launch at a moment's notice. Satellites that appeared to be civilian communication devices were actually kinetic weapons platforms. Loaded with tungsten rods that could strike targets at incredible speeds, the humans had not built a defense system. They had turned their entire civilization into one. Voreth's tactical officer spoke in a trembling voice. "Admiral, our analysis indicates that Earth's combined military capability exceeds initial estimates by a factor of several hundred. They have been hiding their true strength from orbital observation." "Why?" Voreth demanded. "Why would they hide this?" No one could answer. No species in the galaxy had ever behaved this way. When civilizations developed powerful weapons, they displayed them proudly. They built monuments to their strength. They warned potential enemies to stay away. Humans had buried their weapons underground and pretended to be weak. The second discovery was even more troubling. Voreth had expected the humans to react to his invasion fleet with panic. Every species did. When 3,000 warships appeared in orbit, demanding surrender, populations fell into chaos. Governments collapsed. Citizens fled in every direction, trampling each other in their desperation to escape. But as the Kreth sensors swept across Earth, they found something completely different. The humans were not panicking. They were preparing. Factories that had been producing consumer goods were switching to military production. Assembly lines that made vehicles were now making weapons. Workers who had been building homes were now building fortifications. Across every continent, in every nation, humans were transforming their entire economy into a war machine. And they were doing it with terrifying efficiency. Vorsh watched footage of human cities. There was no chaos, no rioting, no mass exodus. Instead, he saw organized columns of vehicles moving toward defensive positions. He saw civilians lining up at distribution centers to receive weapons and ammunition. He saw children being loaded onto transport vehicles, evacuated to mountain shelters that had been built generations ago. As if the humans had always known this day would come, his science officer, a female named Kesra, approached him with a data tablet clutched in her shaking hands. Her scales had gone pale, a sign of extreme distress. "Admiral, I have completed the biological analysis you requested. I believed there must be some explanation for their behavior, some genetic factor that would explain why they are responding differently than other species." And Kesra held up the tablet. "Sir, I've found the explanation, but I do not think you will like it." She displayed a Evolutionary History of the Human Species, compiled from their own scientific records. Vorath studied the information, not understanding at first. Then, slowly, the truth began to take shape. The Kreth had assumed that humans were prey animals, soft, weak, easy to frighten. This assumption was based on their physical appearance, their apparent lack of natural weapons. The assumption was completely wrong. Humans were not prey. They had never been prey. Their evolutionary history was one of constant violence, constant struggle, constant warfare. They had risen to dominance on their planet not through peace, but through their ability to kill anything that threatened them. They hunted creatures 10 times their size. They drove dozens of other species to extinction. They fought each other with such frequency and intensity that their entire civilization was shaped by war. Every major technological advancement in human history has been driven by their need to kill each other more efficiently, and somewhere along the way, they had learned something that most predator species never discovered. They learned to cooperate. They formed tribes, then nations, then alliances that spanned their entire world. They took their predator instincts and combined them with the collective power of billions of individuals. Working together, Kesra looked at Vorath with fear in her eyes. "Admiral, we classified them as prey. We were wrong. Humans are apex predators, the most successful apex predators their planet has ever produced. And they have been fighting wars against each other for their entire existence." Vorath understood now. He understood why the scouts had been destroyed so quickly. He understood why the humans had shown no fear. He understood why they had hidden their weapons and pretended to be weak. They had been waiting. Humanity had spent thousands of years at war. They had refined the art of killing to a degree no other species could match. Every conflict, every battle, every desperate struggle for survival had been practiced, and now they were facing a new enemy. The kind of enemy they had always dreamed of. An enemy from outside their world. An enemy that united them all. A transmission arrived from the planet's surface. General Oilerin again. Her voice remained calm, almost conversational. "Admiral Vorath Kren, I observed your sensor sweeps. Now you have seen what we have been building for the past 2 centuries. Allow me to explain something about humanity. We have always known that we are not alone in the universe. We have always prepared for this moment. Every war we fought against each other taught us something new. Every weapon we built made us stronger. You came here expecting to find prey. You found something else entirely." The transmission paused. When Oilerin spoke again, Vorath could hear something in her voice that chilled him to his core. It was not fear. It was not desperation. It was anticipation. "Asha. Your scouts tasted salt water, Admiral. Would you like to taste fire?" Vorath ended the transmission and stared at the blue planet below. For the first time in 300 years of warfare, he faced an enemy that did not behave like prey. An enemy that did not run. An enemy that did not beg for mercy. He had brought 3,000 warships. To conquer a primitive world, now he was beginning to wonder if he had brought enough. Admiral Vorath made his decision. Fear was a weakness, and he had not conquered 12 worlds by giving in to weakness. If the humans wanted to fight, he would show them what real warfare looked like. He would burn their cities from orbit and crush their resistance from the safety of space. "All ships," he commanded, "begin planetary bombardment. Target their largest population centers. Show them the price of defiance." 3,000 warships opened fire. Energy beams and plasma charges rained down on Earth like a storm of destruction. The first targets were the great cities of humanity, places where millions of people lived and worked and dreamed of the future. The bombardment lasted for exactly 47 seconds. Then, humanity struck back. Vorath watched in disbelief as the sky below his fleet erupted with light. Missiles rose from the surface by the thousands. Not hundreds, thousands. They climbed through the atmosphere at speeds that should have been impossible for chemical propulsion. Their guidance systems locked onto Kreth vessels with perfect precision. His ships tried to intercept them. Point defense systems fired continuously, destroying missile after missile. But for every one they shot down, 10 more took its place. The humans had been building their arsenal for 200 years. They had enough missiles to darken the sky. The first Kreth warship exploded. Then another. Then another. Voreth gripped the arms of his command chair as his tactical display lit up with damage reports. His fleet was taking losses. Real losses. Ships that had survived countless battles were being torn apart by weapons that the Kreth had dismissed as primitive. But the missiles were only the beginning. Deep in the mountains of every continent, hidden installations came to life. Railguns, massive, electromagnetic weapons that fired solid metal projectiles at a significant fraction of the speed of light. They had been built in secret, powered by underground reactors. Waiting for exactly this moment, tungsten rods streaked upward from the surface. They moved so fast that they were almost impossible to track. When they struck Kreth warships, they punched through armor plating like needles through cloth. Ships that had withstood direct hits from enemy weapons were suddenly torn open by chunks of metal moving at incredible velocity, and while the Kreth fleet struggled to survive the assault from below, another attack began. Human computer specialists had been studying the captured scout ships. In the hours since the invasion began, they had analyzed Kreth communication protocols and written infiltration programs. Now those programs were unleashed. Across the Kreth fleet, targeting systems began to malfunction. Navigation computers displayed false information. Communication channels filled with static and corrupted data. Ships that tried to coordinate their defense found themselves unable to talk to each other. The humans were fighting a war on every front. Simultaneously, Voreth ordered ground troops to deploy. If he could not win from orbit, he would take the planet the old way, with soldiers and ground vehicles. Drop pods fell toward Earth carrying thousands of Kreth warriors. Each one eager to prove themselves in combat, they landed expecting resistance. What they found was something far worse. Human soldiers were waiting for them. Not running. Not hiding. Waiting. They attacked the moment the drop pods opened, charging from concealed positions with weapons blazing. They fought with a ferocity that the Kreth had never encountered. Voreth watched footage from his ground commanders and felt something cold spreading through his chest. The humans did not retreat when outnumbered. They did not surrender when wounded. They kept fighting until they could no longer move, and even then, some of them crawled toward their enemies with knives in their hands. On the second day, a report came from a forward position that made Voreth's blood freeze. A Kreth heavy walker. A massive armored vehicle designed for planetary assault had been destroyed by a single human. Not a soldier, farmer. The man had used agricultural equipment and homemade explosives to disable the walker's legs, then climbed onto its hull and manually destroyed its sensor array. The walker's crew had killed him, but not before he had ignited the fuel cells and destroyed the vehicle. The farmer had known he was going to die. The footage showed him working calmly, methodically, as if he were performing just another task on his farm. When the explosion came, he was smiling. Voreth did not understand. He could not understand. No prey species behaved this way. Prey ran, prey hid, prey surrendered when the situation was hopeless. Humans did not seem to recognize the concept of hopelessness. On the third day, Voreth received intelligence that broke his resolve completely. The humans had been holding back. The missiles, the railguns, the ground resistance, all of it had been their conventional forces. Their true weapons, their ultimate weapons, had not yet been used. Nuclear devices, thousands of them. Enough to burn the surface of their own planet to ash. The humans had begun calculating which of their own cities they were willing to sacrifice. They were drawing targeting solutions on their own population centers. Preparing to detonate nuclear weapons in places where Kreth forces had landed, they would kill millions of their own people to destroy his army. And that was not the worst part. They were also targeting his fleet. Human spacecraft, crude and slow by galactic standards, were being loaded with nuclear warheads. Suicide missions. Pilots who volunteered to fly directly into Kreth warships, knowing they would die in the explosion. There were more volunteers than spacecraft. A final transmission came from General Oileron, Admiral Voreth Kren. You have fought well, better than we expected, but you have not yet seen what we are capable of. You wanted our surrender? Here is our counteroffer." Her voice was steady, without any trace of fear. "Leave now. Take your remaining ships and return to your space. Do this, and we will let you go." Voreth said nothing. "Stay one more day," Oileron continued, "and we will follow you home. It may take us a century. It may take us 1,000 years. But we will find your worlds, Admiral. We will learn to build ships like yours. We will become stronger than you can imagine. And we will remember everything you have done here." The transmission ended. Vorath looked at his tactical display. He had lost over 800 ships. 200,000 soldiers were dead on the surface below. His fleet was crippled, his army was broken, and the humans were preparing to sacrifice their own civilization just to ensure that he could not claim victory. He thought of the farmer with the explosives, the pilots volunteering for suicide missions, the soldiers who fought until they could no longer breathe. These creatures did not fear death. They feared losing. For the first time in 300 years, Admiral Vorath Kren gave the order to retreat. Not because he was merciful, not because he was honorable, because he finally understood what humans truly were, and he was afraid. Ambassador. Valeth finished reading the final page of Admiral Vorath's testimony and sat in silence. The archive room felt colder than before. The light seemed dimmer. She stared at the holographic display, her crystalline hands trembling slightly. The testimony had continued beyond the retreat. Vorath had written about his return to Kreth space, about the shame of his defeat, about the questions that haunted him for the rest of his life. He had never commanded a fleet again. The Dominion had quietly removed him from service and buried all records of the Earth campaign. They wanted to forget what had happened, but Vorath had refused to forget. He had spent his remaining 50 years writing warnings, recording his experiences, trying to make his people understand what they had encountered. Nobody listened. Not at first. The Kreth told themselves that Vorath had simply been unlucky, that his tactics had been flawed, that a better commander with a larger fleet could succeed where he had failed. Some of the younger warriors even talked about launching a second invasion, this time with enough ships to overwhelm any resistance. Those voices went silent over the following decades because humanity did exactly what General Oileran had promised. They followed the Kreth home, not with warships, not with weapons, with something far more frightening. They sent scouts into the galaxy, tiny vessels that slipped past patrols and observed Kreth space stations from the darkness. They captured fragments of Kreth technology and brought them back to Earth. They studied. They learned. They adapted. Within 50 years, human ships could match Kreth vessels in speed and firepower. Within 100 years, they had surpassed them. Humanity had spent all of its history fighting itself, developing new weapons, new strategies, new ways to destroy enemies. Now they had alien technology to study. They applied the same relentless creativity to understanding it. The Galactic Concord watched this transformation with growing alarm. The Kreth had awakened something terrible. They had given a species of apex predators a reason to look outward at the stars. Valeth scrolled through the historical records that followed Vorath's testimony. Emergency sessions of the Concord. Frantic diplomatic negotiations. Intelligence reports tracking human expansion with increasing concern, and through all of it, one detail appeared again and again. The humans kept records. They documented every Kreth ship that had participated in the invasion. Every commander. Every soldier. They preserved footage of every city that had been bombed, every person who had died. They built memorials on the sites where battles had been fought. They taught their children about the invasion and made them memorize the names of those who had fallen. Humanity did not forget. Humanity did not forgive. The Concord faced a difficult choice. They could try to contain humanity, to limit their expansion, to prevent them from becoming a major galactic power. But the risks were enormous. If they failed, it would simply give humans another enemy to focus their anger on. So they chose a different path. The Concord declared the Sol system a protected zone. Any species that threatened Earth would face the combined military power of every member civilization. Observers were placed throughout, humans spaced to ensure that no one made the mistake the Kreth had made. The official explanation was that the Concord wanted to protect humanity from hostile forces. The truth was simpler and far more frightening. The Concord was protecting everyone else, because the galaxy had seen what happened when humans were threatened. They had seen the missiles rising from the surface. They had seen the soldiers who refused to surrender. They had seen the farmers who strapped explosives to their bodies and died smiling. And they had seen what came after: the relentless advance, the technological growth, the long memory that never faded. No species wanted to be next. Valeth closed the archive, its files, and sat alone in the darkness for a long time. She thought about the red marker on the galactic map. She thought about the Kreth commander who had shown fear at the sight of an unarmed human cargo ship. She thought about Counselor Dravos and his warning about lessons that cost too much to learn twice. Now she understood everything. The next morning, Valeth walked through the corridors of the Hall of Species. She passed diplomats from a dozen worlds, representatives of civilizations that had existed for thousands of years. They all moved with confidence, secure in their power and their place in the galaxy. Then she saw a human. He was a middle-aged man, dressed in a simple diplomatic uniform. Nothing about him seemed threatening. He walked with quiet steps and nodded politely to those he passed. Just an ordinary representative of an ordinary species. Valeth stopped and watched him. She studied the way other diplomats moved around him, the small distance they kept, the careful respect in their eyes. They smiled at him. They greeted him warmly, but they never turned their backs. The human noticed her watching and changed direction, walking toward her with a friendly expression. "Ambassador," he said, his voice pleasant, "I do not believe we have met. I am Ambassador James Chen, representing Earth. You are Sindari, if I am not mistaken. A beautiful species. I have always admired how your people capture light." Valeth forced herself to remain calm. She bowed in the traditional Sindari greeting, keeping her crystalline hands visible and open. "Thank you, Ambassador. I am Valeth." "It is an honor to meet you," Chen smiled. It was a warm smile, genuine and kind. Nothing about him suggested violence or aggression. He looked like exactly what the old Kreth reports had described: soft, harmless, easy to underestimate. "The honor is mine," he said. "I hope we will have the opportunity to work together. The Sindari have always been valued partners of humanity." Exchanged a few more pleasantries, and then Chen continued on his way. Valeth watched him go, her heart's beating faster than normal, as he walked away. She noticed something small on his uniform collar, a pin barely visible unless you looked closely. It showed an image of Earth, the blue planet surrounded by a ring of fire. Beneath the image were two words, written in a human language she had learned to read during her studies: "We remember." Valeth stood in the corridor for a long time after Chen had disappeared. Around her, the business of the galaxy continued. Treaties were signed. Trade agreements were negotiated. Wars were planned and prevented. And somewhere in the distance, a small blue planet orbited an ordinary yellow star. A planet filled with billions of predators who had learned to cooperate. A planet whose people smiled kindly at strangers while keeping records of every wrong ever done to them. A planet that the entire galaxy had agreed, without ever saying it aloud, to never threaten again. Because some lessons truly did cost too much to learn twice, and humanity had made certain that the galaxy would never forget.